So what we're going to do is talk about advisory groups, whether they exist within an organization. So we hear the DEI committees and struck inside institutions like SODAN, like the National Ballet School, etc. And there are a number of organizations that are doing this. Yesterday, I was fortunate enough to be at a meeting with CEOs, predominantly from the music industry, but also the performing arts, where each of them have an internal committee that helps the senior management look at these kinds of issues. And there are a lot of questions about what is the role, what is the responsibility, how to keep them, working and so on and so forth. Who's the membership? I mean, do people transition all the time? So we want to throw a couple of things out today around the role, function, usefulness of these committees in a couple of ways. And it's going to be a conversation. We're going to throw questions out and hear how people respond. At some point along the way, if you feel like you want to ask a question, just raise your hand. Someone will approach you with a microphone, and then throw your question at us. So I want to start with, what are the importance, in your views, of these committees? I mean, what value do you see in the work that you're doing, whether you're an administrator for the committee, as Natasha would be at the National Ballet School, Donna, you're on a committee within a large organization. Michael and Fanny are sort of working on the outside, like advisors to small dance companies, but nonetheless important dance companies, dusk dances and occasional dance. I open the door. Why is this important? Anyone?
I can start. Hi everyone, it's really great to be here. The structure for our committee is of staff members, and they consist from almost all the departments we have at our organization. There's a representative from each of them. For the most part, it's pretty intentionally not management that is a part of the staff committee. And we found that one of the most important roles, especially as I continue as the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion lead, and I work through, for example, our EDI action plan, a large part of that is communication. How do we ensure that the full breadth of our organization is informed about what's happening across the school, but also how do they inform that work, and how are they a part of it, how are they advising, how are they continuing, even with the feedback that we receive and the initiatives that we put in place, like that all has to be communicated in some way. So as we're starting to think of how to provide more communication strategies, we found that our staff committee has been a really good way to increase communication among departments. So each of the representatives at our staff committee meeting, we usually start each of them having all the different representatives bring to the table, whether it's pressing concerns or pressing issues, or maybe it's misunderstandings or seeking clarification from their teams, their departmental teams, and then likewise taking information that's shared at the meeting back to their respective departments. Each department has different schedules for whether it's monthly or bi-weekly or weekly meetings. It all depends on the department, but we found the committee to be, among many other things, but in large part, a very important communication pathway to ensure that all the departments are continually engaged in the work that's being done, and as I said, also informing the work that's done.
Good morning, everyone. So at SOCAN, we have an employee-led equity task force that we formed in 2020, and we meet monthly, and we talk about a plethora of things that are happening within the company. The committee is formed of representatives from across the company, and we report back to our upper management, our executives, which are very passionate about the work that we are doing. And we started just looking internally at our workforce, how diverse we are. We've looked at policies, so there's a lot that's happening within our committee. And management is very passionate about what we're doing.
Sure. Oh, hello. On? Yes. Hi. So I'm here representing Cage the Dance and the Equity Programming Advisory Committee. But just for a bit of context, the invitation came from from CPAMO for Cages and Dance to join. Both Alan and Karen Cage could not be here today, so they asked me to be a representative. I am one of the 9 members of this committee, a very large committee of individuals. And for full disclosure, we haven't met yet as a committee. We were supposed to meet, but COVID derailed that meeting. So I'm here today to offer as much as I can from Cages Dance. I'm not an employee there, though I've worked there numerous times. Just wanted to give some positioning about why I'm here and representing Cages to Dance. What I can say, and I think what's important to bring forward, and and as much as I'm here representing Cages to Dance, I'm also here as an artist, as a practicing artist that has been on so many committees for equity, diversity, inclusion, accessibility, sustainability, whatever you want to call it. I've been on so many. But what I can share is the notion of accountability. And I think it's important for organizations, any one of our organizations or any of yours, to really think about who are we accountable to? Who are the people that we are actually accountable to? And then once we answer those questions, how are who we are accountable to involved in decision-making processes at an organization? And I'm not saying that audience members should in fact make every decision for a festival, or audience members should make every decision for a dance company. But how are they aware of those decisions? How are they involved? And in fact, maybe audience members can make some decisions. Let's go there, right? So I think it's important when we're talking about Indigenous, Black, people of color, equity, diversity, that we really need to understand who we're accountable to and make sure that those folks are in the room. And I think that's what's important about these kind of committees.
Hi, I'm here representing Dust Dances. I'm an educator first and foremost. I was an educator for 30 years, and when I retired, I just wanted to get back to the community that I love and know so much. And the premise of what I do at Dust Dances, and again, one of the things I wanted to really avoid is any kind of label, certainly not an EDI expert or anything of that nature. So my role is as an artist advocate and a social alignment advisor. So basically is to be at as many activities as I can within Dust Dances, whether it's an audition process or a board meeting, or just be there, listen, observe, and give feedback as to some of the things that I might have heard, the between the line comments type of things, and just advise the people involved in these activities to just be aware, maybe of language, maybe of microaggressions that might have been unintentional, but certainly very present. So it's a very informal role, and I like it that way. And the reason I like it is because I think it's my experience that the best conversations, and that's another thing I do, is just invite courageous conversations and just encourage people to just voice what they need to say, no matter how small or big the issue might be. And it's, these informal conversations, we were talking about this actually when we came in, which is funny because it was part of my preamble. The best conversations happen over coffee. In the corporate world and in the education world, we used to have what we call the water cooler conversations. So it's the between, and those are the things that I'm interested in. It's the things that we don't want to say in an official capacity, but what is being said when people are relaxed, or on the opposite end, when they're overextended and a little bit, and that's when they need to talk. So I facilitate conversations, I encourage them, and I try to provide a safe space for people to be able to articulate those issues and those concerns without retribution. So it is just, let's talk, and then it's my role to kind of make sure that these issues are discussed at a level where change might happen.
That's interesting. I want to borrow off. Oh, I've got a question already.
Sorry, I
Okay,
just want-
can you have it pass the microphone?
This is a lot. I just wanted to know who the two people are representing.
Sorry?
The two people who first spoke, I just
Oh,
wanted to know who
okay.
they're representing.
Oh, that's great. I'm representing SOCAN. Familiar with SOCAN?
Not really. Sorry.
Okay, so basically SOCAN, we license the world's songs, basically, and license and then distribute to our membership, which is songwriters, publishers, creators.
And I'm here representing, I work at Canada's National Ballet School. We're an arts training organization and ballet, among many other things, community programs, recreational programs. And as I mentioned, I'm the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Lead at NPS.
Sorry, I have another question. So you guys all talk a lot about conversations and I guess the kind of the example that you set in workplace in terms of equity and diversity and things like that. But in terms of like policy making itself in an institution or in an organization, are you involved in that or is it someone else's job?
Well, at SOCAN is a part of the Equity Task Force. When we joined with CPAMO, they came in to help us with our Equity Task Force. One of our action items was to review our policies that we had in place, and we had a subcommittee from the task force. So it's an employee-led task force. So we had a subcommittee that went in and reviewed the policy, rewrote the policy actually. So we're very involved, and we're just not a committee that we do sit around and we talk, but we're doing actionable things to get things done to basically continue and make it sustainable changes. So we are diverse, that we are inclusive, there is equity within our company, and we're very focused on making this like sustainable. It's not just for now because it is the hot topic. So we are making changes, and we did make changes to our policies.
Thank you for those questions. You actually must be reading my mind because that's where I wanted to go. Was around, what is not just the role, but the impact of these kinds of groups. I mean, one of the challenges around any kind of transformative change is around who has power, use it that way, and who wants to share that. And some of the threats or feelings of fear that may come from those who feel like, I want to make a change here, but I'm not so sure I can speak. Will there be retribution, the term you use, Fanny? Will there be clawback? Will I be ostracized, et cetera, et cetera? So I guess the question I want to ask is, how do your organizations, your organizational leaders, how are they accountable to the groups that you belong to, whether they've met or not? As in your case, Michael, and you have a small dance company, but this advisory group, 9 people, hasn't met yet. And then Fanny, you're working sort of independently, yet you two work in organizations where there are individuals coming together. How does the leadership in each of your areas respond to what you're asking for? Do the people who are on the equity task forces feel comfortable raising difficult issues?
Yes, is the answer. So I wouldn't have offered my services, I guess, if I didn't know that there was a desire and a willingness from the people that are in power at my organization that I represent today to change. There is definitely a desire to be introspective, to understand, to unlearn patterns before we start learning. And I think the most important thing that I think is crucial, and it's lovely at Dust Dances, is that they are willing to take the time to do it, that they understand that this is a marathon, that it's like small steps at a time. So whenever something happens, I do have the ear of the people in power and say, I'd like to have a conversation. Even if something comes up today, I would say, there's an issue that we might need to address here, and just kind of dig deeper to see how we can make changes that will be long-lasting for the organization. So I think it's, determination on our part, and and keep going. Now, I have to say that the momentum is hard to keep because there certainly is fatigue right now over those, and we don't have the luxury to be impatient or fatigued. We just have to keep going. So there is a little bit more fatigue around these conversations because people also want to do the work that they are good at, which is the art making. So, it's kind of trying to combine these two things. So yes, there is a willingness, and my role is to just go to the people that will eventually make these changes.
You got it again.
Yeah, I would just agree with Fanny that there really is an open invitation from the leaders at Cage the Dance, and also the same. I wouldn't be there if I didn't feel there was a genuine intrigue and desire to want to make change in these ways. And I can only really just speak for myself and my positioning in the committee and my expectations of what that might be, and just to put forward, I'm going to bring forward how do we live in complexity and how do we live in spaces of unknowing, because those are the spaces that I live in my own body every day. So I'm going to bring that experience forward with the committee. All the folks on the committee are identified as Indigenous, Black, persons of color. And to say that, how do I phrase this? With Cage of the Dance, all 9 of us have been adjacent to Cage of the Dance in some way in the past. Some of us have been paid consultants for Cage of the Dance. And this is just really a way of formalizing sort of a long history of engagement with different folks into a more formalized committee that hopefully will make some sort of changes for the organization. I think one of the main values of the committee, as I see it, is this notion of responsiveness, is this notion of just being really open to the process. So to walk in with topics of conversation, but not walk in with any kind of outcomes in mind, to allow those outcomes to really come from the individuals in the room. And also for us to then also put forward a Cage of Dance, what our action items are. What I'm looking at Fanny, because Fanny's also a part of this committee, so looking over to Fanny. We're both a part of this committee. Yeah, so to say that, I think the act of us meeting together is going to be very important for that first moment, and I think there is a certain amount of understanding that what we put forward are going to be actual items for the organization to take part in.
So that's interesting because you both don't work in the organizations, so you can't get fired. You can be asked to move on. However, you two work in organizations where you could get fired. Having the conversation, you have to be upfront about what the challenges are. So I'm just wondering your thoughts on how to deal with the sense of organizational leadership responding to the issues that you're raising, which I imagine are kind of hot button issues.
So basically, when our committee was formed in 2020, it was on the request of leadership. So our leadership, they're very aware of what we're doing and fully on board. There are times when our CEO will even jump into our monthly meetings if she has something to talk about or just to see what's happening. So, and she's intentional about that. She's intentional about coming to the meeting or not coming if there are some topics that we really need to move through. And it is a safe space. We talk about everything. Nothing is off the table. We're very direct. But it's a safe space where we don't feel if we want to broach a topic about, we think this is what's happening within the company. There are not enough people that look like me in certain roles. When you have a company where a lot of the roles, you may see people like me in some roles, but what type of roles are there? Are they leadership roles? So I find that at SoCanch, our leadership, they're very involved, and they want the work to continue, and it's a part of our mandate now, where this is a part of who we are, it's part of who we want to be in terms of EDI.
I feel like I have a lot to say, so I'll try to condense my thoughts. But at the National Ballet School, I actually started my career in human resources, and I was working at the school in human resources and have always been advocating for a lot of these things. Before EDI became a concept or a practice or whatever, a lot of these responsibilities fell on HR, but again, not in a direct or a named sense. So when EDI became at the forefront, I think we can all recognize that this gained a lot of momentum in 2020 following George Floyd's murder. And it was our CEO and our executive director who initiated the creation of my role. And I was for a while straddling HR and EDI, and then it became abundantly clear it was a full-time job. And I also advocated for the separation of HR and EDI. So lucky to have been in an organization where our leaders recognize the importance of this, but that's not always the case, and I recognize that. So I think when it comes to accountability, from my perspective, two things are true. Transparency is very important, and that's in regard to what is the problem and what needs to be done. And also, employees, I always tell them, you need to know what the problem is too in order to hold leadership accountable. Like if you don't know what the issue is, you don't know how they impact you, you can't hold leaders accountable. So capacity building among staff and our students actually was also super important in this equation of holding leadership accountable. In regard to transparency, when we began an engagement with the Kojo Institute, who is an equity consultancy, we, at the end of their assessment process, there was a report that was delivered, and I think one of our board members referred to it as being a very spicy report. There was a lot of information in there that the school, you didn't know what you didn't know. And there was not opportunity historically for that information to come forward. Now, some organizations hold that to their chest in their leadership, but again, it was a very intentional practice from our leadership to ensure the whole organization was informed on that report. So it was actually sent to all employees, and they were in large part a part of informing that. There was focus groups and all of these different things. So it was important that there was that transparency. They knew exactly what was said and what the current situation was at the school and what the feedback was from different employees. And there was meetings after employees had a chance to digest the information, because for a lot of employees, it was also shocking. Not so much the ones who provided the feedback, they were like, about dang time we talked about this. But that transparency was so important because there was no hiding, it was naming it. It was naming that there was a problem, it was naming what the problem was, and the report also outlined steps forward. So there was actual action items and objectives that employees could hold the school accountable to. And then further making sure that employees continue to be involved in how that moves forward. So that report ultimately led to our EDI action plan, which again, we're very transparent about. It's on our website if anybody feels like checking it out. But we're very transparent about it both publicly and within our organization, because thankfully, we've moved into a direction where performative action is very easily recognized and called out. So the more transparent you are, it opens room to perspective and to criticism even, and that's all important. Like if you're holding your cards close to your chest, it's very easy for nobody to have a sense of accountability because they don't know what's going on. So I think transparency is a huge and important piece of this, and a huge way in which we're able to hold our management accountable. And with my role, another intentional piece was that I'm a part of the senior management team. So when it comes to our staff committee, I'm a direct line to a table of the executives at our organization. So I ride for people hard, that's my job. And there's never been a meeting at our executive table where EDI has not come up and issues have not been blatantly a part of everything, and therefore my voice is not just mine, it's everybody's, and it needs to be a part of all conversations. Everyone at the organization is responsible for this. Yes, I'm the EDI lead, but everyone has to move this forward. I'm also not an expert in academic schools and ballet instruction, so it has to be a partnership with everybody. But again, if nobody knows what's going on, if nobody knows what the problem is, then there can be no accountability. Sorry, I hope I didn't ramble too much.
I just want to clarify that I don't think they can fire me, no, but I am on contract, like I do have a position at Dust Dancers. The committee with Keisha is sort of different, but you know, Dust Dancers has made the commitment to have my role, you know, as a staff member. You know, the difference might be salary, but do you know what I mean? Like I'm on contract, so I just wanted to sort of make that clear.
Yeah, so you can be fine. Okay.
I can be fine, yes, or my contract will be not renewed.
That just might be fine. Anyway, one of the things that I guess becomes critical, and you know, with CPAMO, we've looked at a lot of organizations that have these kind of advisory committees or internal staff, DEI or EDI or anti-racism, whatever the terminology might be. The thing that keeps popping up is the time needed. So knowing, yeah, really, and whether it's advisors and how the conversation happens. And the question I guess I have is around how do your organizations, the ones you work with or that you know of, prepare for the time? So for example, I'll give a bit of example, not related to any of these organizations. I do some other work in different areas. And one major government organization that I'm working with now actually has and has had an anti-racism, decolonial anti-racism coordinating committee of staff at a middle management level and so on. And this is a human rights organization, so these people are pretty expert in what they do. But they complain. We don't have time to respond to what management is asking us. They give us a policy, but we don't have a resource to respond to the policy in a timely manner, and then they want something next week. We have full-time jobs. That's the question. How do we deal with the time needed to really engage fully with advisory processes, even if there is transparency? What can an institution or an organization give to people that are in those roles to say we respect and desire the function that you're playing, and we need to change the way we are structured to enable that to happen, so we're not asking you to do more in the same time frame. I think that's becoming the question of the day, I find, in advisory committees these days. Open the floor.
There has to be the understanding that this is a part of somebody's role. It's not an add-on. That's the same thing with EDI in all regards. EDI is never like a nice thing to do, or if we have time, we'll do that. Like, it's about changing the narrative around equity work, and that it's not something that's nice to do once you get everything else done, but it actually makes the work you're doing more efficient, more innovative, more productive, more profitable. Like, there's a lot of increasing research around EDI and how it actually leads to better outcomes for organizations. And we have to continue to shift that narrative within organizations. So our committee is voluntary. Within each department, they put forward representatives from each department, but that individual does not hold a greater burden than others. It's a part of their job, and managers have to respect that. The time to attend a meeting for our EDI staff committee is equally as important as them attending a budget meeting or attending a programming meeting. They are equitable. That's what it all means. And so I think it's shifting that narrative, that it's not, you know, Cindy, you can go to the meeting if it doesn't interfere with the rest. No, that is equally the same amount of weight as everything else that person is doing. So the time is given, not in a sense of a nice, it's a part of their role. And it's respected in that way too, that what they can contribute then to their department because their participation in the committee is seen as an important aspect of the same person who's taken a pension course or a training course. So I think it's about shifting the narrative, but that also means shifting the understanding of equity work and its importance.
Anyone else want to add to that?
Yeah. So I think for me, my role on our committee is an add-on, but the work needs to get done, and I think management recognizes that, you have to put in the work. So as much as it is an add-on, the work has to get done. I do take the time to go to the meetings, when I need to go, and does it take away from my job? Yes, but it is important work. And now that you mentioned it, maybe this is something we do bring up where this role becomes a part of, my role, where it is an important part and not just, oh, Donna's on this committee and oh, she has a meeting. As important as it is, I don't think we have gone that far yet to say, okay, this is a part of your role. Performance review time, it should come up saying she is a part of this committee and she is doing important work. But so far, I haven't had any pushback to say, well, you can't go to that meeting because you have other things to do.
And from an advisory, the dance companies, how does that work with time and that you need to basically provide input?
Again, I'm not a scientist, but there's something that really jumps to mind, and I discussed that with Just Dances when I started, is that, neuroplasticity takes opportunity and time. Like, we can change our way of thinking, but it's gonna take time and it's gonna take opportunity. And so I came in saying, this is gonna take time. This is a long-term process. So I came in saying, if you have the time, maybe if I had more time to get to the organization, it would be faster, but this is going to be a long process. And when I had to do a report, for example, to the board, my findings, my outcomes, was that there were no findings and no outcomes. That basically this is a conversation that needs to continue. That's what I found out over the course of it. And I said, you have to make the time, and your commitment to this is going to be ongoing. So, time is a thing, and during COVID, when we could jump from Zoom meeting to Zoom meeting to Zoom meeting, we could accomplish a little bit more. But now that which is weird to say, because I don't want to go back there, but, these conversations in person are much more meaningful, but they take more time. And I think that that's something we have to really keep addressing.
So how do we, and we also, I think, understand that we need a different space to have the conversations we're having. Whether as you're saying, Fanny, say, hey, the person has mentioned 3 or 4 times that it's they, them, not he, him, and so on. So how do we begin to work with our institutions, whether small or large, to say, you know what, Simon and Garfunkel, slow down, you move too fast. You gotta make this last. There's a mic down there, go ahead.
To answer your question, yes, there's been a lot of difficult conversations. And I think capacity building for people is so important. It's important, I said, for our staff to hold people accountable, but our management too, to be able to have these conversations, but have the awareness and understanding about what's happening, because so many issues when it comes to equity are very complex. And oftentimes defensiveness is present or dismissal is present because somebody doesn't have the capacity to really understand the depth of what's happening. And we work with various consultants. I mentioned Kojo, but we also work with other consultants that are also artists. So Kevin, who I think Kevin's here. I don't know if he went somewhere, but we work with Kevin, AC Mensa, Donna Lane. We work with many different equity consultants, and I think in total there's kind of we spent last year over 300 hours in individual conversations between a very small management team, our artistic faculty with various consultants. And I think it was like 100 and something of those hours were just individual conversations about race, anti-racism, anti-Black racism, equity, just with myself, our CEO, and our executive director. It was like 100 and something hours in 1 year were spent on like individual conversations. And we all have very busy jobs, who doesn't? But as individuals, we've carved out the time to have these conversations, and they've been extremely hard. Some of them have led to apologies, some of them have led to ahas, and that's just the reality. And I love this question because rarely do people get very vulnerable and honest about that, but it's true. And oftentimes in those breakdowns are breakthroughs, and they're so important and a part of this process. And you see the EDI work plans, and you see this, but for us, there's so much that happens behind closed doors, and even every decision we make, because we've committed to equity, we've put it at the center of our strategic plan, we have to walk the walk. So we spend so much time just thinking of different angles and thinking how that's going to affect this and that'll affect that, and what are we missing. Organizations, especially like ours, which are predominantly white institutions, they've acted a certain way for so long, and it's become systemic. So to catch yourself on those things requires like very disruptive thinking, which isn't common nature. So that's something that we've had to be very intentional about. And every time we go to do something we've always done, like our gala or whatever, I remember when we went and we're like, okay, let's talk about our gala. And we're like, wait, hold up, is the gala even the right thing to do? Like, does that even support our mission anymore? It did when our strategic plan looked a lot different. So we've had so many moments, especially in the last 3 years, we've had to be very disruptive in our thinking, which has led, but with the increased capacity of everyone at the organization, that has led to these conversations becoming easier and easier, or even people realizing them before they even have to become a conversation. And I think transparency and process is also super important. Like everybody, because it's not always going to be senior management that presents a problem or there's an issue, but everyone being aware of what the process is, when something comes up, what is the full process of what's going to happen, how are decisions made, that being more transparent is also very important too, so that people who want to come forward, they can see exactly what's going to happen, and those who are subject to this, they can see that it's a fair process, if that makes sense. Yeah. And then ultimately holds the decision makers accountable to, if someone says something, you have this policy, something happened and you did nothing about it. Well, we have a policy, you know what I mean? So that also protects against our upper management is not always going to be these amazing people that are willing to do all of this. So how do you have the systems in place that if it were someone else, you can still hold them accountable and say, there's policies in place that you haven't followed. Again, I feel like I'm talking too much.
That's fine. We're about time for the end of this panel, and I want to see if anyone has any last words you'd like to share with people before we go into the break. There's a question over here too. If you get a microphone, there you go.
Really quick question. Well, I'm going to try to be specific. I am curious about in the rehearsal rooms. So, like as artists, if you have a show to put on, you have 4 weeks with sometimes strangers, and these dancers, artists, actors need to be vulnerable and need to, sort of sometimes bring themselves to the piece as well. So how do you create a space in the rehearsal room to make sure that it is safe, it is comfortable, but then also on the other hand, if something does happen, what are the steps that you need to take? Because again, you only have 4 weeks. I'm just, as an actor, I'm very curious about this. And who do you reach out to? Are there trauma counselors in the room? Is there someone there, an active listener? Things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, oh yeah. Okay. Yes, thank you. Juicy. Yeah, I'm still a practicing dancer myself, so I'm in rehearsal rooms, I'm in rehearsal spaces, and I guess just from my own personal experience in different capacities, it's been about the kinds of check-ins and check-outs that happen in the space, the kind of space that's being held by the people in charge and power, whether that's the choreographer, director, what have you. Some companies that I've worked with have had a very clear line of how, if any triggers happen or if anything untoward happens in the rehearsal space, who to talk to and how to talk to, and in fact, multiple people you can talk to. There's also different companies that have had external consultants that you can call a number if you don't feel comfortable reporting inside of the organization. I feel like I'm giving you a laundry list, but there's a lot of ways to address that, and for me I think it's really individual and has to be individual to each organization, and within capacity. And that's also something I wanted to share too, is that these two organizations have a very different capacity than these two organizations. So just to say, to go back to your question, it is about the small wins. It is about I think those incremental changes. And for me, it's about seeing those changes in the people that you're working with, whether it's they're better able to articulate the language around EDI, they're better able to take criticism or understand what happens when they're called in. Those are the little moments that I really love inside of what I do. And that also translates to the rehearsal hall, in that like these are also things that if organizations are cultivating a space where you can call someone in, you can have that, like, and it all comes back to values. Anyway, I'm just going on a tangent, but yeah, those are some of the things I would respond to your question. Sorry.
Thank you. No,
Yeah,
it's just nice to know that. It's nice to know, back when I was in school, we didn't have, things come up, we don't know who to go to. So it's nice to know that working in the theater industry and just in the entertainment business, there are plans in place now.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
that's
I
nice.
wouldn't say that's across the board.
I
wouldn't say that that's a standard in all the industry.
Yeah.
There are certainly some working situations that don't have that, and I'm sure that we'll all encounter that at some point as well.
Mhm.
But I think to the extent that one is able to put forward, okay, these are the practices that I've experienced in this working situation. Can we talk about how they exist in this working situation as well? I think that's an interesting kind of approach that I've taken in some of the rehearsal rooms I've been in, just to bring forward things that I've experienced and how they can help this particular situation if I'm experiencing something that doesn't seem quite right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Just a couple of quick things that you might find useful. On our website, CPAMO, we did a report for Community Stage and Luminato on onboarding. How to bring in people if they're going to be working together perhaps for the first time. They don't know each other and that kind of thing. So what are the responsibilities of the arts organization that brings people in for work? And part of it is, and I give experience, because outside of CPAMO, I also run a multidisciplinary performing arts company. No one enters a rehearsal space until we've had a conversation. I need to be able to understand who's coming into the room. They need to understand the aesthetic that I'm working in. They also need to understand a bit of who are the other people who are involved. And when they come into the rehearsal room, if they're new for the first time, we go around. Who are you, etc. Introduce yourself. What do you, those kinds of things. In the rehearsal process, if there is an issue, we stop. We talk. I feel strongly that chemistry is just as good as being on the dance floor. That if people can work together well, and this is the issue too around EDI, we talk about in the workplaces, if people can understand each other, talk to each other, feel comfortable, vulnerable, empathetic toward each other, the work is going to be a lot better. So I always encourage, the rehearsal folks or choreographers, etc., spend the time. Don't just say we've got 3 hours here. It's got to be all on the floor, no questions asked. Do it, but hey, every now and again there might be a question. How can you stop and have a conversation? When you bring people in, is there a conversation between the director, the choreographer, and the new artist to say, you're walking in my work, because my work is a lot of focuses around a lot of anti-Black racism, and I do work with white artists. I have to be able to say to them, quite frankly, you're going to be playing a role of a racist. You comfortable with that? Let's talk about it. And the unlearning, I know there's one artist in particular, I won't mention her name, we've had many conversations about how she's had to unpack, unlearn, in order to play a role in a production that we're now working at. And we just have the conversation. You know, I never thought about this. I never felt this before. Ooh, what happens here? My emotions. You know, Kevin and I use this expression based on the Liz Lerman critical response process. Is, discomfort should lead to inquiry. And when we are in a creative process, we all know there's discomfort. If you weren't uncomfortable in a creative process, then you might want to put those hours aside. I know as a writer, if I'm not uncomfortable when I'm writing, I just throw it away, right? So how do we take that into when we're connecting with each other from divergent backgrounds, from different perspectives, to say, hey, there may be some things that come up in this process that I'm not so comfortable about. Can I ask questions about it? Can I inquire? Can I probe into this, both internally for myself and then for the individuals in the room so that we're all present? There may be others who have some comments around it. Fanny?
Just very quickly to answer your question. So I'm there from the beginning. I'm introduced at the audition process. You might not need me then. Then you get hired. I'm there during the contract negotiation. I go through the contract and I'm present and my role is described in the contract if you ever need it. So that's another thing. Then I go to rehearsals. So the more you put a face to the title, the more comfortable, if something happens, the more comfortable you would be, so I become a bit more familiar to you and personal. So you might never need me, the person beside you might need me one day, but when you do, it's great.
Can you remind us your title or how you're
Yes,
introduced?
so, and again, the title at first, when we were trying to decide, I wanted the first thing that people saw was that artist advocate, that that's it. I'm just advocating for anybody who's an artist in the organization. And then social alignment advisor. So, any socially cultural, and it took me a long time to come up with that. And there's no acronym for it. So it's just, you have to say the whole thing.
It's going to be stolen.
Sorry.
It's a very good title.
That's great.
It's going to be stolen.
Title, and I'm planning to steal it.
That's totally okay. And I just want to say in terms of capacity, just because I'm in a unique position where, full transparency, as Natasha said, I'm retired, I have a pension, I have time now, I don't, I'm in a position where I can do things that I really believe in and feel strongly about without having to pay the rent. So, I offered my services. I'm hoping that this role I should be doing. Like, there are other people who are probably more qualified and this should be a job in every organization. So I'm in a position where I feel very lucky to be able to kind of promote this because I can. I can be here today. I don't have to run to a job or anything. So that's, now I do have value and I do cost something, but you know what I mean? Like, it's not, that's a luxury that not a lot of organizations have.
Thank you. We're pushing into the breakout time, but I do want to, on that notion of this title you have, there's a wonderful short poem by a Puerto Rican New York poet, Victor Hernandez Cruz, which I've remembered for years. And it goes something like this. You have to remember what you once said, because one day it will come back to you in different clothes, and then you'll have to buy it. So we have to really, again, we are creating new ways of seeing the world. And it's so quick how people will pick up on that and take it somewhere else and morph it into something that is not as meaningful by intent from what we have said. So those are the questions I think that we need to begin to think of. Is in the arts world today, people talk about resiliency. And I remember sitting in a room of predominantly white presenters who were talking about resiliency, and they're talking to me about how to be resilient. And I'm there like, let me tell you a story about my mother. She was a domestic, grade 3 education, 10 kids. One died, who was young. All 9 have university education. Most of those have postgraduate education. Their children are lawyers, doctors, journalists, novelists, etc. Don't tell me about resiliency, please. Right? So it's the way we live that now others who are facing more scarce times are saying, oh, we've come up with this new term. No, you haven't. You just haven't looked to how people who have been on the wrong side of society have been able to survive and thrive. And just the last point, and we can move into breakout. Jazz, for example, considered America's classical music, came from poor Black people. Now it's around the world. I'm being reminded we're time for breakout, and then we're going to have some, I want to thank our panelists this morning, Michael, who had to leave early, Natasha, Donna, and Fanny. It's been great to see them in person. Donna and I have sort of been checking out on Zoom for the past little while and so on, because we do some work with CPAMO.